What caused the change? There were problems with both hanging and transportation. Offenders who were hanged were supposed to show sorrow. Many did. Stephen Gardiner was executed for burglary. He dressed in his death shroud and warned the crowd to avoid his mistakes. Others, like highwayman Jack Rann, pretended not to care in order to die game, as they called it. He dressed up for his hanging and remained defiantly cheerful to the end. This gave the crowd the wrong kind of lesson. The behavior of the crowd itself was also a problem. An observer in the 1780s wrote,
"Hanging crowds have the appearance of a fair or merrymaking. This tends greatly to defeat the end of the punishment."
Some people began to doubt that the spectacle of public hanging did discourage crime. They were influenced by the ideas of the Italian philosopher Beccaria. He wrote,
"Crimes are more effectually prevented by the certainty of punishment."
Hanging was not certain. By the 1820s, 95% of those sentenced to death were pardoned. Transportation, too, had its problems. It was expensive. Between 1810 and 1812, it cost £570,000, the equivalent today of £16 million. On top of this, by the 1830s, Australia no longer wanted to receive Britain's offenders. As hanging and transportation declined, prison sentences increased. Prisons had always existed. Every town had its lockup, every county its jail. But they were used mainly to punish petty crimes or to hold offenders waiting to be hanged or transported. They were privately run and in a terrible condition. When the reformer John Howard investigated them in the 1770s, he found
loathsome cells. Prisoners confined together, men and women. Criminals half-starved. Pestilential fevers.
Nevertheless, more and more offenders were confined in them, and there was much discussion of how they should be treated during their sentence. There was disagreement on the purpose of prison. Was prison to redeem offenders? To help them not to offend again by teaching them religion and useful skills? Or was prison to punish offenders, to teach them the lesson that crime leads to pain? In 1818, a House of Commons Select Committee investigated Newgate and the other prisons in London. One of those who gave evidence was Elizabeth Fry.
When was it you first established a committee of ladies to visit the female prisoners?
It is rather more than a year since I first established a school for the children of convicts. I did not undertake the care of the convicts in general until about 2 months afterwards. We assembled our women, read over our rules, brought them work, knitting and other things. And our institution commenced. It has now been about 10 months. They knit from about 60 to 100 pair of stockings and socks every month. They spin a little. The earnings of their work is generally spent in assisting them to live and helping to clothe them. It is our habit constantly to read the Bible to them. It has been very satisfactory to observe the effect upon their minds.
Do you think that any reformation can be achieved without employment?
I should believe it impossible. If they have nothing to do, they naturally must return to their evil practices.
What reward or hope of reward do you hold out?
Rewards form one part of our plan. We endeavour to stimulate them by a system of marks. If they have a certain number at the end of a fixed period, they have as rewards such prizes as we think proper to give them. Small articles of clothing, Bibles or Testaments. In a prison under proper regulations, where they were sufficiently well fed and clothed, constantly employed and instructed, I have not the least doubt that many of those now the worst characters would turn out valuable members of society.
Mrs. Fry's evidence shows which side of the argument on the purpose of prison she supported.
Our habit is constantly to read the Bible to them.
She believes prisoners should receive religious instruction.
They knit, they spin a little.
She believes they should be given some work to do.
Rewards form one part of our plan.
She believes in giving rewards for good behavior.
I have not the least doubt that many of those now the worst of characters would turn out valuable members of society.
She believes that the purpose of prison should be to make it possible for the prisoners to rejoin society. Did the prison system develop as reformers like Mrs. Fry hoped?